My husband left me because his failed brother told him marriage was a scam for women to control men, so they started a podcast about being free and single, but it failed miserably, and now he keeps texting me and showing up everywhere I go saying he made a mistake. The first 5 years of my 35F marriage with my husband Charles, 38M, went by without major problems. I was 28 when we got married. We had our routines. Charles handled the yard work and car maintenance. I did most of the grocery shopping and meal planning. We split the cleaning based on whoever had more time that week. During tax season, I picked up extra freelance work, so Charles would cook more often. He complained about it sometimes, but he did it. We argued about small things. He never remembered to take the recycling bin to the curb on Thursdays. I always left cabinet doors open after grabbing dishes. Normal married people stuff. We talked about buying a bigger house in a few years. Charles wanted a 2-car garage and a basement for storage. I wanted a proper office since I was doing more remote work. We had started saving for a down payment. Not aggressive saving, but we put away a couple hundred each month. Our plan was to have enough for 20% down within 3 years, maybe less if we got tax refunds or bonuses. Then Charles's older brother Trevor, 42M, moved back to town. Trevor had been living about 6 hours away for the past decade. He got divorced from his first wife after 2 years. The second marriage lasted 4 years before it ended. The third one fell apart after 18 months. Trevor always blamed the women. His first wife wanted too much attention. The second one spent too much money. The third one tried to control his friendships. According to Trevor, he never did anything wrong in any of those relationships. When Trevor first came back, Charles was cautious. He told me Trevor had a negative attitude about relationships and that we should keep our distance. The first few months, Trevor would stop by maybe once every 2 weeks. He would drink a few beers, complain about alimony payments, and leave. Charles usually tuned him out. One time Trevor went on a rant about how marriage benefited women financially and trapped men into servitude. Charles told him he was being dramatic and that not every marriage worked like that. But then something changed. Trevor started calling Charles every day. Sometimes twice a day. Charles would step outside to take the calls or go sit in his car in the driveway. When I asked what they talked about, Charles said Trevor was going through a rough patch and needed someone to vent to. I did not push it. Brothers talk. That seemed normal. Around month 4 of Trevor being back, Charles started acting different. He would come home from work and barely acknowledge me. No hello kiss. No asking about my day. He would grab something from the fridge and go straight to the living room to watch TV or scroll on his phone. When I asked him to help me move a bookshelf one evening, he sighed and said I was always asking him to do things. I pointed out that I had asked him maybe twice in the past month for help with furniture. He did not respond. He just moved the bookshelf and went back to his phone. The small things piled up. I asked him to pick up milk on his way home because I had a late meeting and would not make it to the store. He texted back saying I was nagging him. I reminded him we were supposed to visit my parents that weekend. He said I was trying to control his schedule. None of these conversations made sense. We had always coordinated tasks. That was how we functioned as a household. One night, Charles came home with this look on his face. Not quite smiling, but smug. Like he had figured something out that I did not know yet. I asked if something good happened at work. He said no. Then he told me Trevor had opened his eyes about a lot of things. He said he had been too blind to see the patterns before. I asked what patterns. He said I would not understand because I benefited from them. I stood there holding a dish towel, trying to figure out what he meant. He walked past me and went upstairs. That was the first night he did not come to bed at the same time as me. He stayed up until past midnight, texting someone. I could hear his phone buzzing from the guest room where I eventually moved to sleep because his phone kept lighting up the bedroom. The distance got worse. Charles stopped doing the small things that made us feel like a team. He used to bring me coffee in bed on Saturday mornings. That stopped. We used to watch a show together on Wednesday nights. He started watching it without me or skipping it entirely. When I tried to talk to him about it, he accused me of being dramatic. He said people change and I needed to accept that. Then one morning, about 6 months after Trevor moved back, Charles sat down at the kitchen table while I was eating cereal before work. He had a folder in his hand. He opened it and slid papers across to me. Divorce papers. Already filled out. He said he had thought about it for weeks and realized we were fundamentally incompatible. He used that exact phrase. Fundamentally incompatible. Like he had rehearsed it. I put my spoon down. I asked him where this was coming from. He said he had been living a lie and he refused to do it anymore. He said the marriage had run its course and there was no point dragging it out. I asked if this had anything to do with Trevor. He said Trevor helped him see clearly, but the decision was his own. He said he already talked to a lawyer and filed the paperwork. He just needed my signature. I did not cry. I did not yell. I asked him if he was sure. He said yes. I asked him if there was anything I could do to change his mind. He said no. I nodded and told him I would look over the papers. He seemed surprised I did not argue. He got up and left for work. I sat there for another 20 minutes, staring at the papers. I moved out a week later. My friend Carla, 34F, had a spare bedroom and let me stay there while I figured out next steps. I took my clothes, my laptop, some kitchen items I had brought into the marriage, and my books. I left the furniture. I left the decorations. I did not want to fight over things. I just wanted out. Charles and Trevor started posting pictures together on social media. They went to bars. They went to baseball games. They posted photos with captions like brotherhood over everything and finally free. One photo showed them holding beers with custom koozies that said dodged a bullet on one and no more compromise on the other. They threw a party at Charles's place and had donuts with phrases like single and smart written in icing. People we knew mutually saw the posts. A few reached out to ask if I was okay. I told them I was fine. I did not give details. I did not trash Charles publicly. I signed the divorce papers without asking for anything beyond splitting our joint savings account evenly. Charles had expected me to fight for the house or his retirement account. When I did not, he seemed almost disappointed. He sent me a text 2 weeks after I signed everything. It said, "It's done. Good luck." I found a studio apartment on the east side of town. It had one big room with a kitchenette and a bathroom with a narrow shower. I painted the walls a light gray and bought a small couch from a thrift store. I got new sheets and towels. I hung my own pictures. I picked out my own coffee mugs. Small things that I had compromised on during the marriage because Charles had opinions. He always wanted neutral colors and minimal decorations. I bought bright throw pillows and a yellow desk lamp. I picked up extra shifts at work. My supervisor asked if I wanted to take on more remote clients since I was good at processing complicated payroll situations. I said yes. The extra income helped me afford the apartment without stretching too much. I bought a real espresso machine, the kind I had wanted for years but never got because Charles thought it was a waste of money. About a month after the divorce finalized, our mutual friend Tiago, 36M, told me something. He said Charles had been telling people I would come crawling back soon. Charles apparently believed I could not handle being alone. Trevor had convinced him I was too dependent on the marriage to make it on my own. Tiago said Charles was waiting for me to text him and beg to reconcile. I did not text Charles. I did not call him. I did not react to his social media posts. I went to work. I came home. I cooked meals I liked. I watched shows Charles never wanted to watch. I went on a weekend trip to a cabin upstate by myself. I brought books and sat by the lake. I did not post about it. I did not tell anyone except Carla where I was going. The silence seemed to bother Charles more than anything I could have said. Update 1: Charles's life fell apart faster than I expected. Tiago told me Charles and Trevor quit their jobs about 6 weeks after my divorce finalized. They decided to start a podcast called Real Dudes Real Talk. The concept was them sitting in Charles's garage, drinking beer, and complaining about modern relationships. They posted episodes twice a week. Each one was just them rehashing the same complaints about how women expected too much and men got a bad deal in marriages. I listened to part of one episode out of curiosity. Charles talked about how he had wasted years trying to make someone happy who could never be satisfied. He did not use my name, but anyone who knew us would know who he meant. Trevor jumped in and agreed, saying younger guys needed to learn from their mistakes. The comment section was not kind. Most people called them bitter. A few said they sounded like middle-aged men having a midlife crisis. One comment said they were the poster children for why divorced men should not give relationship advice. The podcast lasted about 2 months before they stopped posting. I heard through Tiago that they ran out of things to talk about and the listener count never broke 300. Trevor moved into Charles's house. They were splitting rent and utilities. I guess Trevor could not afford his own place with 3 alimony payments. Charles posted less on social media. When he did post, it was usually pictures of him and Trevor watching sports or working on Charles's truck. The captions got shorter. Less triumphant. Then Charles started texting me. The first one came on a Tuesday night. It just said, "Hey, hope you're doing okay." I did not respond. 2 days later, he sent a picture of Thai food with the caption, "Remember when we used to get this every Friday?" I left him on read. A week after that, Tiago told me Charles and Trevor had a massive fight. Neighbors heard them shouting for 3 nights straight. On the 3rd night, someone heard glass breaking. Tiago said Trevor moved out the next day and went back to his 3rd ex-wife. Apparently she took him back on the condition he got a job and stopped trashing her to his family. I ran into Charles at a birthday party for Tiago's girlfriend. I almost left when I saw him there, but Carla convinced me to stay. Charles looked rough. He had not shaved in a while. His shirt was wrinkled. He used to be meticulous about his appearance. He always ironed his shirts and kept his beard trimmed. He came up to me while I was getting a drink from the cooler. He asked if we could really talk. Not here, but sometime soon. I shrugged and told him I did not think we had anything to talk about. He said he made mistakes and wanted to explain. I told him he did not owe me an explanation. He stood there for a moment, then walked away. I stayed at the party for another hour, then went home. The texts kept coming. He asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. He sent me articles about communication and relationships. He told me he missed me. I did not block his number, but I did not respond either. Carla asked why I did not just block him. I told her I did not know. Maybe I wanted to see how far he would take it. Maybe I was waiting for something. I was not sure what. Update 2: Charles started showing up places I went. First, it was a pop-up art market Carla dragged me to on a Saturday. I was looking at handmade pottery when I saw him near the entrance. He was holding a coffee and pretending to look at paintings, but he kept glancing my way. I ignored him and left through the back exit. Then he showed up at my apartment complex. I came home from work one evening and found him sitting in his truck in the parking lot. He got out when he saw me and said he brought some of my old things I had left at the house. A box of books and a picture frame. Things I did not need or want back. I told him to donate them. He said he thought I might want them. I took the box to make him leave. I decided to meet him for coffee to tell him to stop. I picked a cafe near my office, public and busy. I texted him the time and place. He showed up 10 minutes early. He looked better than he had at the party. Clean-shaven, decent shirt. He ordered a black coffee and sat across from me. He started by saying Trevor had messed with his head. He said his brother was bitter and jealous and convinced him to throw away something good. He said he had been stupid and he wanted to fix things. I asked him what he thought fixing things looked like. He said we could try again. Start over. Maybe go to counseling if I wanted. He said he realized what he had and he was sorry for not appreciating it. I laughed. Not a mean laugh, just automatic. The whole thing was absurd. He looked startled. I told him he did not miss me. He missed having someone who handled the parts of life he did not want to deal with. Someone who coordinated schedules and remembered birthdays and kept the house running while he did whatever he wanted. I told him he threw me away the second he thought he had a better option. He sat there believing I would fall apart without him, and when I did not, he panicked. He started tearing up. Actual tears. He said that was not fair. He said he made a mistake and people deserve second chances. I told him I already gave him years of chances to appreciate what we had. He chose to listen to his brother instead. I paid for both coffees and left. He stayed at the table. I did not look back. Update 3: Charles's mom called me 3 weeks ago. She said Charles had been in a car accident. He was in the hospital with cracked ribs and a concussion. She said he was asking for me. I told her I was sorry he was hurt, but I was not the right person to call. She said he kept saying my name in the ER. I told her he would be fine and hung up. A letter showed up at my apartment a week later. Handwritten, shaky letters. Charles wrote that Trevor had been a bitter and jealous influence. He said he was hollow now and did not know how to fix himself. He said he did not expect me to forgive him, but he wanted me to know he understood what he lost. I threw the letter away. I met someone 2 months ago. His name is Ben, 37M. We met at a work dinner, one of those networking events my supervisor insisted I attend. Ben worked in logistics for a shipping company. We started talking about a failed painting project he tried during lockdown. He said he watched 6 YouTube tutorials and still managed to paint his bedroom ceiling with stripes because he did not tape properly. I told him about the time I tried to build a bookshelf from a kit and ended up with 3 extra screws and a wobbly shelf. We got coffee the next week. Then dinner. Then a weekend hike. He asked questions and listened to my answers. He did not talk over me or steer every conversation back to himself. He remembered things I mentioned in passing, like how I hated fennel or wanted to visit the coast in October. Last week, I ran into Charles at a bookstore. I was looking for a cookbook and he was in the self-help section, holding a book about mindfulness. He still had a faint bruise on his cheek from the accident. He saw me and froze. He walked over and said he was glad to see me. He said he hoped whoever I ended up with would truly see me for who I was. He said he wished he had. I told him I already found someone who saw me just fine. Someone who did not need his life to fall apart first to realize I was worth keeping. Charles stood there, holding his book. I walked to the register, paid for my cookbook, and left. I have not heard from him since. I do not expect to. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2: My uncle made my girlfriend so uncomfortable she stopped coming to my house. Then I found out he was creating fake social media profiles to contact her and asking her coworkers about her schedule. I, 18M, have been dating my girlfriend Chloe, 17F, for about 8 months now. We met in my senior year of high school and she's honestly the best thing that's happened to me. She's funny, smart, and gets along with everyone. The problem is my uncle Mason, 28M. Let me give you some background first. My uncle Mason is my dad's younger brother. He's been living with us for the past year after he lost his job and got evicted from his apartment. My parents felt bad for him and let him move into our guest room. Mason never really grew up. He still acts like he's in college, plays video games all day, and doesn't contribute much to the household. My parents constantly make excuses for him. When Chloe and I first started dating, Mason seemed normal enough. He'd say hi when she came over and didn't really bother us. But about 3 months ago, things started getting weird. It began with small comments that I thought were just awkward attempts at being friendly. The first incident happened when Chloe was over for dinner. She was wearing a sundress because it was hot outside. Mason walked into the kitchen where she was helping my mom with dishes and said something about how the dress looked good on her. Chloe just smiled politely and said, "Thanks." I didn't think much of it at the time. But then it kept happening. Every time Chloe came over, Mason would find some way to comment on her appearance. He'd say things like how her hair looked nice or how she had a pretty smile. Chloe would always just say thanks and try to change the subject. I started noticing that she seemed uncomfortable, but she never said anything to me about it. The comments got worse over time. Mason started making remarks about her body. He'd say things like how she was in good shape or how she must work out a lot. Chloe would just laugh nervously and try to move away from him. I finally told him to knock it off, but he just said he was being nice and that I was overreacting. Then Mason started asking me questions when Chloe wasn't around. He'd want to know details about our relationship that were none of his business. He'd ask where we go on dates, what we talk about, and other personal stuff. When I told him it wasn't his concern, he'd say he was just being interested in my life as my uncle. The situation got much worse about a month ago. Chloe and I were watching a movie in the living room when Mason came downstairs. He sat down on the couch next to Chloe, even though there were other seats available. He kept making comments about the movie and trying to start conversations with her. Chloe was clearly uncomfortable but was too polite to say anything. At one point during the movie, there was a romantic scene. Mason made a comment about how the actress was attractive and then looked at Chloe and said she was even prettier. Chloe just stared at the TV and didn't respond. I told Mason to go somewhere else if he wanted to talk during the movie. He said he was just trying to be friendly and that I needed to relax. After that night, Chloe started suggesting we hang out at her house instead of mine. When I asked why, she said she just wanted a change of scenery. I suspected it had to do with Mason, but I didn't want to push her if she didn't want to talk about it. Last week, things reached a breaking point. Chloe and I were in my room doing homework when Mason knocked on the door. He said he wanted to show Chloe something on his phone. Chloe said she was busy, but Mason insisted it would just take a second. He showed her some meme that wasn't even funny. Chloe fake laughed and said it was nice, then immediately went back to her homework. Mason didn't leave though. He sat on my bed and started asking Chloe about her classes and her friends. Chloe answered his questions but kept looking at me like she wanted help. I told Mason we needed to focus on our homework, but he said he was just being social. Then Mason asked Chloe if she had a job. She said she worked part-time at a clothing store at the mall. Mason said he should come visit her sometime and maybe she could help him pick out some clothes. Chloe said she mostly worked in the back doing inventory, but Mason said he was sure she'd make time for family. I told Mason he needed to leave us alone to study. He finally left, but not before telling Chloe she should let him know if she ever needed a ride to work since he had nothing else to do. Chloe just nodded and said, "Thanks." After Mason left, Chloe was quiet for the rest of the evening. When I walked her to her car, she said she had to work the next day and might not be able to come over for a while. I asked if everything was okay, and she said she was just tired. The next day, Chloe texted me that Mason had shown up at her work. She said he came into the store and asked for her specifically. When her manager brought her to the front, Mason said he was there to buy a gift for his girlfriend and needed her help. Chloe said she helped him pick out a scarf, but the whole time he was asking her personal questions about her schedule and when she usually worked. Chloe said Mason stayed in the store for almost an hour. He kept finding reasons to continue the conversation and asking her about different items. Other customers were waiting, but Mason didn't seem to care. Finally, Chloe's manager had to ask Mason to make his purchase so Chloe could help other customers. When Mason was leaving, he told Chloe he might come back soon since she was so helpful. Chloe said she just smiled and said she hoped he liked the scarf. She texted me right after her shift ended because she said the whole thing made her uncomfortable. I was furious. Mason had no reason to go to Chloe's work, and it was obvious he was using the shopping trip as an excuse to bother her. I confronted him when I got home that night. I asked him why he went to Chloe's store, and he said he really did need to buy a gift. When I asked who the gift was for, he said it was for a friend and that it wasn't my business. I told Mason he needed to stop bothering Chloe and that his behavior was making her uncomfortable. Mason said he didn't know what I was talking about and that he was just being friendly. He said Chloe had never complained to him about anything, so clearly she didn't have a problem with him. I said it didn't matter if Chloe complained or not, his behavior was inappropriate. Mason said I was being paranoid and that he was just trying to get to know my girlfriend since we'd been dating for months. He said most people would appreciate having family members who cared about their relationships. The argument got heated. I told Mason he wasn't acting like a caring family member, he was acting like a creep. Mason said I was being disrespectful and that he was going to tell my parents how I was talking to him. I said I didn't care and that he needed to stay away from Chloe. My parents did hear about the argument, but not from Mason. They heard us yelling and came to see what was happening. Mason told them I was being hostile toward him for no reason and that I had accused him of being inappropriate with Chloe. My parents asked me what was going on. I explained everything that had been happening, including Mason's comments about Chloe's appearance and his visit to her work. My parents listened, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. My dad said Mason was probably just trying to be nice and that I might be misinterpreting things. My mom said Mason had always been friendly with everyone and that maybe I was being overprotective. I tried to explain that Chloe was clearly uncomfortable and that Mason's behavior was escalating. My parents said they would talk to Mason about being more mindful of boundaries, but they also said I needed to be more understanding of Mason's situation. They said he was going through a hard time and that having family support was important. Mason was standing there the whole time with this smug look on his face. After my parents left, he told me he was glad we could clear the air and that he hoped we could get along better. He said he really did want to have a good relationship with Chloe since she was important to me. I told Mason that a good relationship meant respecting boundaries and not making Chloe uncomfortable. Mason said he understood and that he would be more careful about his approach. But something about the way he said it made me think he wasn't taking any of this seriously. The next day, Chloe came over to work on a project for school. We were in the kitchen when Mason walked in. He apologized to Chloe for making her uncomfortable and said he just wanted to be a good uncle. Chloe said it was okay and that she appreciated the apology. But then Mason said he hoped they could still be friends and that he'd love to get to know her better. He suggested maybe the three of us could hang out sometime and do something fun together. Chloe looked at me and said that sounded nice, but she wasn't very convincing. Mason then said he had been thinking about what Chloe had said about working inventory at the store. He said he used to do similar work and that if she ever needed advice or help with anything, she should let him know. Chloe said thanks but that she was doing fine with her job. Mason wouldn't drop it though. He kept talking about how retail work could be stressful and how it was good to have someone to talk to who understood. Chloe kept giving short responses and looking at me like she wanted the conversation to end. Finally, I said we needed to get back to our project. Mason said of course and that he didn't want to interrupt our schoolwork. But as he was leaving, he told Chloe to remember what he said about being available if she needed anything. After Mason left, Chloe was quiet again. I asked if she was okay, and she said she was fine. But I could tell something was bothering her. She seemed distracted for the rest of the afternoon and left earlier than usual. That night, Chloe texted me asking if we could talk. She said she didn't want to cause problems with my family, but Mason's behavior was making her uncomfortable. She said she appreciated that I had stood up for her, but she was worried about coming over to my house anymore. I told Chloe she didn't need to worry about causing problems and that her comfort was more important than keeping peace with Mason. I said we could hang out at her house or other places if that made her feel better. Chloe said she felt bad about avoiding my house, but she didn't know what else to do. I'm at a loss here. My parents don't seem to understand how serious this is, and Mason acts like he's done nothing wrong. Chloe is trying to be polite about everything, but I can tell she's really bothered by this situation. I don't want her to feel like she can't come to my house, but I also don't want to force her to be around someone who makes her uncomfortable. I've been thinking about talking to my parents again, but I don't think they'll take it more seriously than they did the first time. Mason is their family, and they seem to think I'm overreacting. I'm worried that if I push too hard, they'll just get defensive and the situation will get worse. What should I do? Is there a way to handle this that will actually make Mason stop bothering Chloe? I feel like I'm failing to protect my girlfriend from my own family, and I don't know how to fix this. Update 1 I posted a couple weeks ago about my uncle Mason making my girlfriend Chloe uncomfortable. I got a lot of advice telling me to document everything and talk to my parents again. Some people suggested involving Chloe's parents, which I wasn't sure about at first. Well, things got much worse before I could decide what to do. Last week, Chloe was scheduled to work a closing shift at the mall. She usually gets off around 9 p.m., and I try to pick her up when I can. That night, I had to work late at my part-time job, so I couldn't get her. Chloe said she would drive herself home and that it wasn't a big deal. When Chloe got to her car that night, Mason was waiting for her in the parking lot. He said he had been shopping at the mall and saw her car, so he thought he'd wait to say hi. Chloe said she was surprised to see him and asked how he knew which car was hers. Mason said he had seen her driving it before and recognized it. Chloe told me she immediately felt uncomfortable because the parking lot was pretty empty and it was getting dark. She said Mason seemed different somehow, more confident or something. He asked her how work went and whether she was tired. Chloe said she was fine and that she needed to get home. Mason then asked if Chloe wanted to grab a bite to eat since it was dinner time. Chloe said she wasn't hungry and that her parents were expecting her home. Mason said it wouldn't take long and that there was a good restaurant right there in the mall. Chloe said she really needed to get home. Mason kept pushing though. He said Chloe worked hard and deserved to treat herself. He said he would pay for dinner and that it would be fun to hang out just the two of them. Chloe said she appreciated the offer but that she really couldn't stay. Mason finally backed off, but he said he hoped they could have dinner together sometime soon. He said he really wanted to get to know her better and that they never got to talk without me around. Chloe said maybe sometime and got in her car. But Mason didn't leave. He followed Chloe out of the parking lot and stayed behind her car for several blocks. Chloe said she was getting scared and didn't know what to do. She considered calling me, but she didn't want to worry me while I was at work. Finally, Mason turned off onto a different street. Chloe drove straight home and called me as soon as she got there. She was really shaken up and said she felt like Mason had been following her on purpose. I told her I was coming over right away. When I got to Chloe's house, she was crying. She said she had been trying to give Mason the benefit of the doubt, but waiting for her in the parking lot and following her car was too much. She said she was scared to go to work the next day in case he showed up again. I was furious. Mason had crossed a line from making inappropriate comments to actually stalking Chloe. I told her we needed to tell her parents what was happening. Chloe was worried about getting me in trouble, but I said this was beyond protecting my family's feelings. Chloe's parents were home, so we told them everything. I explained all the comments Mason had made, his visit to Chloe's work, and now this incident in the parking lot. Chloe's parents listened to everything without interrupting. When we finished, Chloe's dad asked if my parents knew about Mason's behavior. I said I had tried to talk to them, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. Chloe's mom asked if Mason had ever touched Chloe or made any direct threats. Chloe said no, but that his behavior was escalating and she was scared. Chloe's parents said they were going to call my parents immediately. They said this behavior was unacceptable and that something needed to be done right away. Chloe tried to say she didn't want to cause problems, but her dad said protecting her was more important than avoiding conflict. I was there when Chloe's dad called my house. He asked to speak to my parents and said it was urgent. My parents must have been confused because they asked me to come home right away to explain what was happening. When I got home, my parents were waiting in the living room with Mason. Chloe's dad had told them about the parking lot incident, and they wanted to hear my side of the story. I went through everything again, including the details I'd tried to tell them before. My parents looked shocked when I described Mason following Chloe's car. They asked Mason if this was true, and he said there had been a misunderstanding. Mason claimed he was just being friendly and that Chloe had misinterpreted his intentions. Mason said he had gone to the mall to buy something and happened to see Chloe leaving work. He said he thought it would be nice to say hello and maybe offer to buy her dinner as a way to apologize for making her uncomfortable before. He said he had no idea she was scared and that he was just trying to be nice. When my parents asked about following her car, Mason said he had been driving in the same direction anyway and hadn't realized Chloe might think he was following her. He said if he had known she was scared, he would have gone a different way home. My parents seemed to buy Mason's explanation, at least partially. They said Mason should have been more thoughtful about how his actions might be perceived. But they also said it sounded like there had been some miscommunication and that Mason's intentions weren't malicious. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I pointed out that Mason had lied about several things. He had claimed he was just shopping at the mall, but he had been waiting by Chloe's car specifically. He had said he was driving in the same direction, but he had followed her for several blocks before turning off. My parents said those were good points, but they thought Mason might have been embarrassed about admitting he had gone to the mall specifically to see Chloe. They said Mason was probably trying to downplay his actions because he realized they were inappropriate. Mason jumped on this explanation. He said he was embarrassed about waiting for Chloe and that he had made up the shopping story because he didn't want to admit he had gone there just to see her. He said he realized now that this behavior was wrong and that he was sorry for scaring Chloe. Mason said he had genuine feelings for Chloe and that he thought she might feel the same way. He said he knew it was complicated because she was dating me, but he couldn't help how he felt. He said he had been trying to find a way to spend time with her to see if there was a connection between them. My parents looked uncomfortable with this admission. My dad said Mason couldn't pursue someone who was already in a relationship, especially with his own nephew. My mom said Mason's feelings didn't justify making Chloe uncomfortable or scared. Mason said he understood now that his approach was wrong. He said he had convinced himself that Chloe might be interested because she was always polite to him. He said he realized now that she was just being nice and that he had misread the situation. Mason apologized to me and said he never meant to disrespect my relationship with Chloe. He said he had let his feelings cloud his judgment and that he was sorry for causing problems. He promised he would keep his distance from Chloe and wouldn't bother her anymore. My parents seemed relieved that Mason was taking responsibility for his actions. They said they were disappointed in his behavior but that they appreciated his honesty and apology. They said Mason would need to find somewhere else to live because his actions had made Chloe uncomfortable in our home. I was surprised by this last part. My parents had been making excuses for Mason throughout this whole situation, but telling him to move out was more serious than I had expected. Mason looked shocked too and asked if there was any way he could make things right without having to leave. My parents said they needed to think about it, but that Chloe's safety and comfort had to be the priority. They said they would talk to Chloe's parents about what steps needed to be taken to make sure everyone felt safe. The next day, my parents called Chloe's parents to discuss the situation. I wasn't part of that conversation, but Chloe told me her parents insisted that Mason needed to move out immediately. They said they wouldn't feel comfortable with Chloe coming to my house as long as Mason was living there. My parents agreed to give Mason 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. They said they would help him financially if needed, but that he couldn't stay in our house anymore. Mason was upset about this but said he understood. Mason found a room to rent across town and moved out last weekend. He apologized to Chloe directly before he left, saying he was sorry for making her uncomfortable and that he hoped she could forgive him someday. Chloe said she appreciated the apology but didn't really respond beyond that. Since Mason moved out, things have been better. Chloe feels comfortable coming over to my house again, and my parents have been more supportive of our relationship. They seemed to realize they had been minimizing the situation before and that Mason's behavior was more serious than they had thought. But I found out something yesterday that changes everything. Chloe's friend works at the same mall, and she told Chloe that Mason had been coming to the mall regularly for weeks before the parking lot incident. He had been asking other store employees about Chloe's schedule and which days she worked. Chloe's friend said Mason had told people he was Chloe's boyfriend's uncle and that he was planning a surprise for her. The employees thought it was sweet and had been giving him information about when Chloe was working. Chloe's friend only found out about this after hearing about what happened in the parking lot. This means Mason had been planning his interactions with Chloe for much longer than any of us realized. The parking lot incident wasn't just a coincidence or a spur-of-the-moment decision. He had been gathering information about her schedule and planning when to approach her. I haven't told my parents about this yet because I'm not sure what good it would do now that Mason has moved out. But it makes me realize that his apology and claims about misreading the situation were probably lies. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he had been planning it for weeks. Chloe is upset about this new information, but she's also relieved that Mason is gone. She said she feels like she can finally relax and not worry about him showing up places or making comments. Her parents are satisfied with how my parents handled the situation once they understood how serious it was. I'm still processing everything that happened. I'm glad Mason is gone, but I'm also disturbed by how calculated his behavior was. It makes me wonder what else he might have been planning if things had continued to escalate. Update 2: Things were going well for a few weeks after Mason moved out. Chloe was comfortable coming over to my house again, and we were both relieved to have the situation behind us. My parents had been more supportive of our relationship, and everything seemed to be getting back to normal. But last week, I found out that Mason hadn't actually moved on like we thought. Chloe was working her usual shift at the mall when her manager called her into the office. The manager said someone had called the store asking detailed questions about Chloe's employment. The caller had claimed to be conducting a background check for a potential employer and wanted to verify Chloe's work history. The manager thought this was strange because Chloe hadn't mentioned looking for another job. When the manager asked Chloe about it, Chloe said she hadn't applied anywhere else and wasn't job hunting. The manager described the caller as a man who seemed to know personal details about Chloe, including her full name and the fact that she was still in high school. Chloe immediately suspected this was Mason, but she didn't have any proof. The manager said the caller had refused to provide the name of the company he was supposedly calling from. When the manager asked for a callback number, the caller said he would call back later and hung up. 2 days later, Chloe received a friend request on social media from a profile she didn't recognize. The profile had a generic name and no profile picture, but the account had been created recently. Chloe showed me the profile, and something about it felt familiar, but I couldn't place what it was. Chloe declined the friend request, but the next day she received a message from the same account. The message said the person had seen her around town and thought she seemed nice. The message asked if Chloe would be interested in getting coffee sometime and getting to know each other. Chloe showed me the message, and I immediately thought it sounded like Mason. The writing style and the way the person phrased things reminded me of how Mason talked. Chloe agreed that it seemed suspicious, especially given the timing with the phone call to her work. We decided to do some investigating. I looked up the phone number that had called Chloe's work, but it was a number we didn't recognize. Chloe checked the social media profile more carefully and noticed that it was following several people from our high school, including some of my friends. This seemed like too much of a coincidence. Someone who randomly saw Chloe around town wouldn't know to follow people from our school. Chloe and I agreed that this was probably Mason using a fake profile to try to contact her. Chloe blocked the account and changed her privacy settings to make her profile more private. She also told her manager not to give out any information about her to anyone calling the store, even if they claimed to be from a potential employer. I wanted to confront Mason about this, but Chloe said she just wanted to ignore it and hope he would give up. She said she didn't want to create more drama, especially since we couldn't prove it was actually him. But things escalated again a few days later. Chloe was walking to her car after work when she noticed someone sitting in a car across the parking lot. The person was too far away for her to see clearly, but something about the situation made her uncomfortable. Chloe decided to go back into the mall and wait for the parking lot to clear out more. She called me and asked if I could come pick her up. I was at home and told her I would be there in 20 minutes. When I got to the mall, Chloe was waiting inside by the entrance. She pointed to where the car had been parked, but it was gone. Chloe said the car had left about 10 minutes after she went back inside, right around the time she had called me. We went to Chloe's car together, and I followed her home to make sure she got there safely. Chloe said she might have been paranoid, but the whole situation felt too similar to what had happened with Mason before. The next day, I decided I needed to talk to my parents about what was happening. I told them about the call to Chloe's work, the fake social media profile, and the car in the parking lot. I said I thought Mason was still bothering Chloe even though he had moved out. My parents listened to everything, but they seemed skeptical. They pointed out that I couldn't prove any of this was actually Mason. They said it could be a coincidence or someone else entirely. My dad said Mason had been doing better since moving out and that he doubted Mason would risk causing more problems. I asked my parents to call Mason and ask him directly about these incidents. They said they would consider it, but they also said they didn't want to accuse Mason of something without proof. They suggested that maybe Chloe should report the incidents to the police if she was really concerned. Chloe didn't want to involve the police because she said they probably wouldn't take it seriously without more evidence. She said she just wanted the whole situation to go away and that she would be more careful about her surroundings. But I was getting more worried. Mason's behavior had been escalating before he moved out, and now it seemed like he was finding new ways to monitor Chloe's activities. I decided I needed to find out for sure if Mason was behind these incidents. I drove to the address where Mason was supposed to be living. I had gotten the address from my parents when they were helping him move. When I got there, I saw Mason's car in the driveway, so I knew he was home. I knocked on the door, and Mason answered. He seemed surprised to see me and asked what I was doing there. I told him I wanted to talk to him about some things that had been happening to Chloe. Mason invited me in and said he didn't know what I was talking about. I described the phone call to Chloe's work, the social media profile, and the incident in the parking lot. Mason listened to everything and said he had no idea what I was talking about. He said he had been staying away from Chloe like he promised and that he wasn't bothering her anymore. Mason seemed genuine when he denied being involved in these incidents. He said he understood why I would suspect him given what had happened before, but he insisted he had learned his lesson and was moving on with his life. Mason said he had been going to counseling to work on his behavior and that he was trying to be a better person. He said he realized his actions had been inappropriate and that he didn't want to cause any more problems for Chloe or our family. I wanted to believe Mason was telling the truth, but I was still suspicious. I asked him about his phone and social media accounts to see if he would be willing to show me that he hadn't been contacting Chloe. Mason said he would be happy to prove his innocence and showed me his phone. Mason's phone showed no recent calls to Chloe's work and no social media accounts that I could see. He had my parents' numbers and a few other contacts, but nothing that seemed suspicious. Mason said he had actually deleted most of his social media accounts as part of trying to move on from his old behavior. I left Mason's place feeling confused. Either he was telling the truth and someone else was bothering Chloe, or he was better at hiding his activities than I had given him credit for. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I didn't have any proof. When I got home, I told my parents about my conversation with Mason. They said they were glad I had talked to him directly and that they were impressed he was willing to show me his phone. They said maybe we should consider that someone else might be responsible for the incidents involving Chloe. But then something happened that changed everything. Chloe's friend from the mall called her and said she had seen Mason there again. The friend said she had been working late and saw Mason walking around the mall after most of the stores had closed. She said he seemed to be looking for something or someone. Chloe's friend said she had watched Mason for a few minutes, and he had gone to the area where Chloe's store was located. The friend said Mason had looked through the windows of Chloe's store and had tried the door handle, but the store was already closed for the night. This happened on a night when Chloe wasn't working, but Mason wouldn't have known that unless he had been keeping track of her schedule somehow. Chloe's friend said she had wanted to approach Mason and ask what he was doing, but she was scared and had left the mall instead. When Chloe told me about this, I realized Mason had been lying to me when I visited him. He was still going to the mall and still trying to find opportunities to see Chloe. I felt stupid for believing his act about going to counseling and moving on with his life. I called my parents immediately and told them what Chloe's friend had seen. I said Mason had lied to me and that he was still stalking Chloe. My parents said they would call Mason and demand an explanation for why he had been at the mall. Mason denied going to the mall when my parents called him. He said Chloe's friend must have been mistaken or that she had seen someone else. He insisted he had been staying away from Chloe and that he wouldn't risk getting in trouble again. But Chloe's friend was certain it had been Mason. She said she had talked to him several times when Chloe was working and that she knew what he looked like. She said there was no way she could have mistaken someone else for him. My parents were finally starting to realize that Mason hadn't changed like he claimed. They said they were going to have a serious conversation with him and that there would be consequences if he didn't stop bothering Chloe. I told my parents that talking to Mason wasn't enough anymore. He had already proven he would lie and continue his behavior even after promising to stop. I said we needed to take more serious action to protect Chloe. Final update: after my last update, my parents finally realized that Mason wasn't going to stop on his own. They called him and gave him an ultimatum: stop bothering Chloe completely or face serious consequences. Mason continued to deny doing anything wrong, but my parents said they didn't believe him anymore. My dad told Mason that if there were any more incidents involving Chloe, they would call the police and support whatever charges Chloe wanted to file. My mom said they were disappointed that Mason had lied to them and that they were done making excuses for his behavior. Mason got angry during this conversation and said we were all overreacting. He said he had made some mistakes before, but that he wasn't doing anything wrong now. He said Chloe's friend was lying about seeing him at the mall and that we were all ganging up on him unfairly. The conversation ended with Mason hanging up on my parents. My dad said Mason had shown his true colors and that they were done trying to help him. They said they would support whatever Chloe and her family decided to do about the situation. Chloe's parents decided they wanted to document everything that had been happening in case they needed to involve the police later. They asked Chloe to write down all the incidents with dates and details. Chloe had been keeping notes on her phone, so she had records of most of what had happened. Chloe's dad also contacted the mall security office and told them about Mason's behavior. He provided them with a description of Mason and asked them to watch for him. The security office said they would make a note in their system and that they would ask Mason to leave if he was spotted bothering any employees. For about a week after this, things were quiet. Chloe didn't have any more incidents at work, and we started to hope that Mason had finally gotten the message. Chloe was still being careful about her surroundings, but she was starting to feel more relaxed. Then last Monday, everything came to a head. Chloe was working a morning shift when Mason showed up at her store. He walked in like a regular customer and started looking around at the merchandise. Chloe saw him and immediately felt scared, but she didn't want to cause a scene. Mason browsed for a few minutes and then approached the counter where Chloe was working. He said he wanted to buy something and asked Chloe to help him. Chloe said she would get another employee to help him, but Mason said he specifically wanted her assistance. Chloe's manager was in the back office, and there were other customers in the store, so Chloe felt like she couldn't just walk away. She helped Mason find what he was looking for while trying to keep the interaction as brief as possible. Mason kept trying to make conversation while Chloe was helping him. He asked about her classes and how she was doing. Chloe gave short answers and tried to focus on completing the sale. Mason also made comments about how nice it was to see her and how he had missed talking to her. When Mason was paying for his purchase, he told Chloe he was glad they could be friends again. He said he hoped they could spend more time together soon and that he had some ideas for fun things they could do. Chloe didn't respond to this and just processed his payment. As Mason was leaving, he told Chloe he would see her soon. Chloe said she hoped he enjoyed his purchase and that was it. But she was shaking after he left and had to sit down in the back room for a few minutes. Chloe called me right after this happened. She was upset and said she felt like Mason was testing her to see if she would cause problems. She said he had been acting normal enough that she couldn't really complain about him, but his presence in the store had made her terrified. I was furious that Mason had gone to Chloe's work again after everything that had happened. I told Chloe to tell her manager what had happened and that we needed to call the police this time. Chloe agreed and said she was done trying to handle this quietly. Chloe's manager was supportive when Chloe explained the situation. The manager said they would ban Mason from the store and that Chloe should call security immediately if he came back. The manager also said they would review the security footage from that day in case it was needed for evidence. Chloe and I went to the police station that afternoon. We brought all the documentation of Mason's behavior, including the dates and details of each incident. The police officer who took our report said this sounded like stalking and harassment. The officer said they would contact Mason and issue him a warning to stay away from Chloe. The officer also said Chloe could file for a restraining order if she wanted additional legal protection. Chloe decided to wait and see if the police warning would be enough to make Mason stop. The police called Mason that evening and told him he was not allowed to contact Chloe or go to places where she worked. They said any further incidents would result in criminal charges. Mason apparently got upset during this call and said he was just trying to be friendly. The police officer told Mason that his definition of friendly was actually harassment and that he needed to stay away from Chloe completely. The officer said this included her work, her school, and any other places she might be. Mason was told that violating this warning would result in immediate arrest. My parents were relieved when they heard the police had gotten involved. They said they should have supported taking this step sooner and that they were sorry for not taking the situation more seriously from the beginning. They said they felt terrible that Chloe had been put through all of this because of their family member. For 2 weeks after the police warning, there were no incidents. Chloe felt more confident at work knowing that Mason could be arrested if he showed up. She was still cautious, but she was starting to feel like maybe the situation was finally over. But Mason wasn't done. Last Friday, Chloe got a call at work from someone claiming to be conducting a survey about customer service. The caller asked specific questions about Chloe's job satisfaction and whether she felt safe at work. Chloe thought this was strange and hung up. Later that day, Chloe found a note on her car windshield. The note said someone had noticed her car had been making a strange noise and that she should have it checked by a mechanic. The note included the name and address of a specific auto repair shop across town. Chloe showed me the note, and we both thought it was suspicious. Chloe's car had been running fine, and she hadn't noticed any strange noises. The note also seemed like an odd way for a stranger to communicate about a car problem. I decided to call the auto repair shop mentioned in the note. When I asked if they had left notes on cars in parking lots, they said they had never done anything like that. The person I talked to said someone had called earlier asking about their services, but they hadn't given out any information about specific customers. Chloe and I realized this was probably another attempt by Mason to get information about Chloe or to trick her into going somewhere. We took the note to the police station and reported it as another incident of harassment. The police officer we had worked with before said this pattern of behavior showed Mason was continuing to monitor Chloe despite the warning. The officer said they would contact Mason again and that Chloe should consider filing for a restraining order since the verbal warning hadn't been effective. Chloe decided to file for the restraining order. Her parents supported this decision and said they wanted the strongest legal protection possible for their daughter. The paperwork was filed on Monday, and Mason was served with the restraining order on Tuesday. Mason violated the restraining order the very next day. He called my parents' house and left a voicemail saying he needed to talk to me about Chloe. He said there had been a misunderstanding and that he could explain everything if I would just listen to him. My parents called the police immediately and reported the violation. The police went to Mason's apartment and arrested him. He was charged with violating a restraining order and stalking. Mason was held overnight and had to post bail to be released. Mason's arrest finally convinced my parents that he was a serious problem. They said they were cutting off all financial support and that they didn't want any contact with him until he got professional help. My mom said she was ashamed that she had defended his behavior for so long. Mason tried calling my parents several more times over the next few days, but they didn't answer. He left voicemails saying he was sorry and that he just wanted to make things right. My parents forwarded all of these voicemails to the police as evidence of continued harassment. Chloe felt enormous relief after Mason was arrested. She said she finally felt like she could go to work and live her life without constantly worrying about him showing up. Her parents were satisfied that the legal system was finally taking the situation seriously. Mason's court date is scheduled for next month. Chloe will have to testify about his behavior, but she says she's ready to do whatever is necessary to make sure he can't bother her anymore. The prosecutor said Mason could face jail time if he's convicted of the charges. My parents have been very supportive since Mason's arrest. They've apologized repeatedly for not taking the situation seriously from the beginning and for making excuses for Mason's behavior. They said they've learned a lot about how harassment affects victims and that they should have listened to Chloe and me from the start. Chloe and I are doing well now. Our relationship has actually gotten stronger through all of this because we learned how to support each other during a difficult situation. Chloe says she feels like she can trust me to protect her, and I've learned how important it is to believe someone when they say they're being harassed. The whole experience has been a nightmare, but I'm glad it's finally over. Mason is facing real consequences for his actions, and Chloe feels safe again. My parents have learned not to enable bad behavior just because someone is family, and they're being more supportive of our relationship. I still can't believe it took Mason getting arrested for my parents to finally understand how serious his behavior was. But I'm grateful that they're supporting Chloe now and that they're not making excuses for Mason anymore. Chloe deserves to feel safe, and I'm glad she finally does.